It was the last house on the block, the one no one wanted to talk about. It had been abandoned for years, but I never knew why until I moved in. I wasn't desperate, just practical. The rent was dirt cheap, the neighborhood quiet, and the landlord seemed eager to hand over the keys without much conversation. I was fine with that. I wasn't looking for history lessons, just a fresh start. The first few nights were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking, setting up furniture, and ignoring the way my footsteps echoed a little too much in the empty house. The only thing that seemed remotely eerie was the basement door. Thick, wooden, and locked tight. I figured it was just old storage. Then, on the fourth night, I started hearing noises. Soft scratching, like nails against wood. I chalked it up to rodents. The house was old, probably infested with mice. But it wasn't just scratching. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear something heavier, a dull thud, like something hitting the walls downstairs. I convinced myself it was the pipes. That lasted until the night I found the basement door unlocked. I knew I hadn't touched it. I stood there for a long time, heart hammering, fingers brushing against the brass handle. The door was slightly ajar, and from within, there was nothing but deep, swallowing blackness. Then, just barely, I heard it, breathing. Long, slow inhalations, like something was waiting for me to step forward. I slammed the door shut and locked it. That night, I barely slept. My dreams were filled with the sound of that breathing, as if it had crawled its way up the stairs, past my bedroom door, and was whispering in my ear. The next day, I called the landlord. "Hey, what's in the basement?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Silence. Then, "Don't go down there." Click. That was it. I should have packed my bags. I should have called someone. But curiosity is a sickness, and mine had already festered. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the basement door. The house was silent, except for my breathing. Then I heard it again. But this time, the breathing wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from right behind me. I spun so fast I knocked over my chair. But there was nothing. Just the kitchen, empty and still. My chest was tight, my hands shaking. Then I heard the door creak open. Slowly, agonizingly. I backed away as the darkness beyond the threshold seemed to pulse, like a living thing. I could feel it watching me, waiting. A shape shifted in the blackness. A long, skeletal hand curled around the edge of the doorway. I ran. I locked myself in my bedroom, pushing the dresser in front of the door. I didn't sleep. I sat there, gripping my phone, trying to call someone, anyone. But the service was dead. The scratching started again, not at the basement door, at my bedroom door. I stayed frozen, breath shallow. Then, a voice, whispering, "Let me in." I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because when I opened my eyes, the room was bathed in gray morning light. Everything was silent. The dresser was pushed back against the wall. The bedroom door was wide open, and on the floor, leading from the basement door to where I stood, were wet footprints. I packed my bags that morning. I didn't ask for my deposit back. I didn't try to make sense of it. The last thing I saw as I drove away was the front window, curtains swaying as if something was standing behind them, watching me go. That was 6 months ago. The house is still listed for rent. Story 2. I took the job because it paid well, ridiculously well. That should have been the first red flag. The classified ad was simple: overnight security needed for private estate. Must be discreet. No experience necessary. $3,000 per week. I thought it was a joke at first, but when I called, the voice on the other end gave me an address and told me to be there by 9 p.m. sharp. No interview, no background check, just an address. I arrived just before sunset, my car rumbling up a long, winding driveway flanked by dead trees. At the top of the hill stood the mansion, sprawling and black against the bruised evening sky. A man in a suit was waiting for me on the steps. He was tall, gaunt, his skin almost translucent in the dying light. He barely spoke as he handed me a small earpiece and a folded sheet of paper. Rules for the night watchman. Lock the doors at 10 p.m. sharp. Do not open the front door for anyone. Do not look out the windows after midnight. If the radio in the security room turns on by itself, do not adjust the volume. At 3:33 a.m., place the chair in front of the basement door and leave it there. Do not look inside. If you hear knocking from inside the walls, ignore it. At sunrise, you may leave. I laughed. Is this a joke? The man's expression didn't change. Follow the rules, he said, or you won't last the night. And then he was gone. I should have driven away right then, but $3,000 was too much to walk away from. At 10 p.m., I locked the doors. At midnight, the windows went black. Not dark, black, like something outside had swallowed the light. Then the knocking started. It was soft at first, like fingernails against wood, then harder, more urgent. It came from the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath my feet. I followed the rules. I ignored it. At 1:47 a.m., the radio in the security room crackled to life. Static, at first, then a voice, whispering, my name. I didn't touch the volume. At 3:33 a.m., I took the chair and placed it in front of the basement door. Something on the other side sighed. I didn't look. By 4 a.m., I was shaking, sweat slicking my skin despite the cold. The knocking hadn't stopped. The radio was still whispering. And then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming down the hall. I gripped the arms of my chair, heart hammering. The footsteps stopped just outside the security room. The door handle twitched. I squeezed my eyes shut. Then a voice, soft and rasping. We see you. I don't remember the rest of the night. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows. The mansion was quiet. I grabbed my keys and ran. As I reached my car, I glanced back at the house, just once. A figure stood in the upstairs window, watching, smiling. I never went back. The number that had hired me was disconnected. But sometimes, late at night, I hear knocking. In the walls. Story 3. I moved into the apartment because it was cheap, not because it was nice. The walls were thin, the plumbing rattled, and the paint was chipping in places. But rent was low, and I needed a place fast. The first night was normal. I unpacked, ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter, and fell asleep on my mattress, too exhausted to even put the sheets on. The second night, I noticed something odd. The apartment across the hall, the one directly in front of mine, had its peephole covered. A small, black sticker pressed against the glass. It wasn't there when I moved in. By the third night, I realized something else. That apartment's door was always closed, but I never saw anyone go in or out. No sounds, no lights, no movement. It was just there. Then, on the fourth night, I heard it. Scraping. A long, slow drag of something heavy across the floor, coming from inside the apartment across the hall. I crept to my door, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. Then, a whisper, right on the other side. I see you. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. My peephole faced directly across from theirs, and though I knew it was impossible, I swore I could feel eyes staring at me from the other side. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went to the landlord. There's something weird about the apartment across from mine, I said. Is someone living there? The landlord, an older guy with a cigarette perpetually hanging from his lips, gave me a look. What apartment? I laughed nervously. 309? Right across from me? He stared at me, then leaned in slightly. There is no apartment 309. I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. What do you mean? He sighed, rubbing his temples. That unit's been sealed up for years. The door's just there to cover the space. I didn't believe him. I went back upstairs and stood in front of the door. It was real. I could knock on it. And when I did, something inside knocked back. Hard. I ran. That night, I barricaded my door. The air in my apartment felt thick, wrong, like I wasn't alone. At 3:09 a.m., I woke up. My peephole was dark. I didn't understand at first. Was the light in the hallway out? Then I realized. Something was standing on the other side, covering the peephole. I sat frozen in my bed, blankets pulled up to my chin, barely breathing. Then, knock, knock, knock. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't answer. By sunrise, the air in my apartment felt lighter. The door across the hall was still there, still shut, but my peephole was clear again. I moved out that day. I don't know who or what was in that apartment, but sometimes, late at night, I hear knocking, and when I check my peephole, it's dark again. Story 4. I should have listened to my gut when I first saw the house. The listing described it as a quaint countryside retreat. Cheap rent, fully furnished, and secluded. The pictures showed a cozy, rustic home with a wraparound porch and a sprawling backyard leading into the woods. It looked perfect. Too perfect. I met the owner, a woman in her 60s with deep-set eyes and a thin smile. She handed me the keys with almost too much enthusiasm. "Just one thing," she said, pausing at the doorway. "If you hear knocking at night, don't open the door." I laughed. Afraid of burglars? Her expression didn't change. "Just don't." I chalked it up to small-town superstitions and moved in that evening. The first few nights were peaceful. I worked from home, so I spent most of my days on my laptop, enjoying the quiet. The only downside was the woods. Something about them made me uneasy. They were dense, and even in the daylight, they seemed wrong, like they were watching me. Then, on the fourth night, the knocking started. A slow, deliberate tap-tap-tap against the front door. I sat up in bed, my stomach knotting. It was after midnight. Who the hell knocks at this hour? I grabbed my phone, tiptoeing to the window. The porch light flickered dimly, casting just enough glow to see nothing. No one was there. I stayed up until dawn. The next night, it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. A little louder this time. I crept to the door, heart hammering. Who's there? Silence. Then, tap, tap, tap. I peered through the peephole. At first, I thought I saw nothing. Just darkness. But then my vision adjusted, and I saw it. A face. Pressed right up against the peephole. Pale. Hollow eyes. A mouth that stretched too wide in a smile. I stumbled backward, choking on air. The knocking stopped. That night, I didn't sleep. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Lack of sleep, paranoia, tricks of the light. Anything to make it less real. But then I found the footprints. Not shoe prints. Bare feet. Leading from the woods. I called the owner. My voice was shaking. "You said not to open the door," I whispered. "Why?" She was silent for a long time. Then, "They can't come in unless you let them." A chill ran down my spine. That night, I didn't go near the door. I ignored the knocking. It went on for hours. Louder, harder, until the walls rattled and the windows shook. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence. I stayed awake until morning. The next day, I packed my things. I didn't care about breaking the lease. I just wanted out. But when I went to leave, I found something waiting for me. At the front door, just outside, were handprints, smudged against the wood, as if something had been pressing against it all night. I never went back. The house is still listed. Rent has dropped even lower. But no one stays long. Story 5. I didn't want the job. It was just something to hold me over while I looked for something better. Night shifts as a cleaner at an old hotel. The pay was decent, and I liked the solitude. But there were rules. The manager, a stiff-looking man with a permanent frown, handed me a laminated sheet on my first night. Rules for the night cleaner. Only clean rooms that are unoccupied. If you hear voices in an empty room, keep walking. The mirrors in rooms 209 and 327 are covered for a reason. Do not remove the sheets. If the phone at the front desk rings after 2 a.m., do not answer. At 3:15 a.m., you may hear knocking from inside the supply closet. Do not open it. If you see someone in the hall that doesn't belong, do not acknowledge them. I laughed. Is this a joke? The manager just shook his head. Follow the rules, he said, and you'll be fine. I didn't believe in ghosts, but there was something wrong with that hotel. The air was stale, the lights buzzed too loudly, and the walls seemed to listen. By my second night, I started noticing things. Footsteps in the hall when no one was there. The cleaning cart moving on its own when my back was turned. And the mirrors. Even though I never touched the sheets, sometimes they'd be off when I walked by, revealing a glimpse of what was inside. It wasn't my reflection. It was something else. And it was watching me. One night, at exactly 3:15 a.m., I was refilling my mop bucket when I heard it. Knocking. From inside the supply closet. It was faint, hesitant, like someone tapping, waiting for an answer. I froze. My eyes locked on the door. It rattled slightly, just a little shake. Then, a whisper. "Help me." I stepped back, my breath shallow. The knocking got louder. Desperate, I ran. The next night, I was determined to ignore everything. Just keep my head down, do my job, and leave. But as I was vacuuming the hallway carpet, I saw him. A man, tall, pale, wearing a tattered suit. He stood at the far end of the hall, staring. The rules said not to acknowledge them. I looked away. The vacuum hummed beneath me, drowning out my heartbeat. But when I glanced up, he was closer. Not walking, just closer. My hands clenched around the vacuum handle. I took another step forward. So did he. I turned and ran. I don't know how I made it through the rest of my shift, but at sunrise, I quit. I didn't go back for my final paycheck. I didn't care. I just wanted to forget. But every now and then, I dream about that hallway. And in the dream, I turn around, and he's standing right behind me.